Hey everybody, it's me again with a Lesson 76 Addendum video, as if that lesson wasn't long enough already. Turns out I'd left off doing one task at the end of that video that I really wanted to talk about. So if I press play, we have a slight UI glitch in our inventory at the moment. I'm sure many of you have noticed it at the moment. But when I call up the inventory with our backpack tab selected, you'll notice that the backpack scroll view always starts off scrolled down at the very bottom. And perhaps even worse than that is the scroll bar isn't even the right size. It seems I have to interact with it to actually cause the calculation to happen. Now we had something very similar when we were authoring our UI with our description tab. You may remember when you selected an item, if the text was long enough, it would cause the scroll view to come up, and whenever we selected a new item, what we needed to do in the end was maintain a reference to the scroll view itself and force it to recalculate its normalized position. Now just to remind you of that, because we're going to do exactly the same thing with the backpack scroll view as well, if I select my player UI and open up the general description or the weapon description layout, you'll notice that in those support structures we actually maintained a reference to the scroll view of that panel. And the reason why we did that is if I call up our player inventory UI script, in the display general description function, which is called every time we need to change the description, right at the bottom of that function, you'll notice that we used its scroll view reference and set its vertical normalized position property to 1. And that always made sure that when we updated the general description window and we added more text, that the whole layout would be recalculated and the scroll view would once again be positioned at the top. So we need to do the same thing for our backpack tab as well. So just to remind you, if we open up our backpack panel, you'll notice there's the scroll view there. So we're going to need to add an additional reference to our player inventory UI script so that we can maintain a reference to this scroll view. We can just set this scroll view's vertical normalized position to 1 as well and force the scroll view to go up to the top. So let's open up the player inventory UI script, scroll up to the top, and what we'll do is underneath where we declare all of the PDA references, we'll put a separate header in there that says backpack scroll rect, and we'll declare a new variable of type scroll rect. It's protected, but it's serialized, and we'll call this backpack scroll rect. Now if I save that off, go back to the editor and hook up that assignment, I first need to select the player inventory UI script, wait for the script to compile, and we should see, there it is. We now have this backpack scroll rect header with this new slot where we can add a reference to a scroll rect. So let's now drag over the scroll view game object from our backpacks sub hierarchy and drop it in there. I'm just going to apply all of these overrides to the prefab. So the player inventory UI prefab is updated with all of the changes that we made in the last lesson. Now that our player inventory UI script has a reference to the backpack's scroll rect, it seems that all we should really need to do is maybe at the bottom of the invalidate function, we just set the vertical normalized position of the backpack scroll rect to 1. Well, there's a bit of a problem with that, and in fact, after a little bit of testing, I realized this also affects our general description layout and our weapons layout as well. So I think what's happening here is, let me call up the inventory a moment so we can see what I'm talking about. So I think what happens is when we're making alterations to the contents of a scroll view via code, perhaps adding additional items as a child of that scroll view, it seems the actual layout of those elements is deferred until later on in the frame. So what happens is when you set the vertical normalized position to 1, the layout of the UI element, in particular the scroll view, hasn't actually happened yet. So you're basically setting the scroll bar or the scroll view before the scroll view or its scroll bar knows how big it's got to be and has done all of its internal layout calculations yet. And the easiest way to fix this was to do much like what we did in the last lesson, where we had to defer that call to the refresh PDA entries function until the next frame. We'll just do the same at the bottom of our invalidate function. Instead of setting the vertical layout position of our backpack to 1 at the bottom of that function, we'll just start a coroutine that yields for 1 frame and then sets that vertical position. So let's do that now by opening up our player inventory UI. I've scrolled down to the very bottom of the invalidate function here. Sorry, it's not actually the invalidate function I want to do, it's the initialize function. Obviously, if we reset the scroll views in the invalidate function, then it meant every time we made a change to our inventory, the backpack scroll view would pop up to the top, and that might not be what we want, especially if we've scrolled to the bottom of the scroll view on purpose. No, what we want to do is do it in the initialize function, which of course is where we are dynamically adding UI elements to our various scroll views. So this is where the calculation needs to be performed at the very bottom of this. So at the bottom of the initialize function, when we set the default tab groups, we will make a call to a function which we haven't written yet called reset scroll views. And this is going to be a coroutine. So you can see I use the start coroutine function to invoke it. And then underneath the initialize function is where I'm going to create the reset scroll views function. And not only am I going to take this opportunity to set the vertical normalized position of the backpack scroll view up to the top, but I'm also going to use this function to also make sure that we do the same for the weapon description layout and the general description layout. Now, it doesn't matter that we currently still make this call in the display general description layout and the display weapon description layout. It just means that when we do call this function, it's also going to make sure that they are scrolled to the top as well when we first initialize the UI. So no harm's done by doing all of them together, and we make sure that we cover all scenarios that we might encounter. So I'm going to paste the function in its entirety. So of course what we do is we yield return null, which basically means this function is going to do nothing within the frame from which it was invoked, but then in the next frame it says, hey, if we have a reference to that backpack scroll rect, then set its vertical normalized position to 1, and it does the same for the general description layout and the weapon description layout as well. So if we save that off, go back to the editor, press play, let me disable our inventory because that's how we need to have it when we start the game. When I call up that inventory now, what I'm hoping is that the backpack will have its scroll bar right at the top and we will be at the top of that scroll rect. Hey, and there you go, it's worked perfectly. But obviously, because we only did that in the initialize and not whenever we invalidate it, if we were to leave the inventory and go and pick something up and then go back to the inventory, it is still at the scroll position at which we left it. Oh, by the way, in this version of the project that you're looking at, I have already created the Ambrose Osterholt PDA. This is the one I will be uploading to the website. So if we walk over, we can see, hey, there's Dr. Julia Pearson's PDA, and there's Dr. Ambrose Osterholt's PDA.
This is Dr. Ambrose Osterholt, log entry 24.
And you can see in the PDA panel, it correctly displays his name, his subject, and his texture. Okay guys, so thanks for bearing with me with this little addendum video, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.